Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive into Prototype by Jonathan Martin. This book has a really interesting take on authenticity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and how it connects to Jesus like as a model for living.
Okay.
It's gotten some pretty good reviews too, like over 500 ratings on Goodreads,
Wow.
and it averages like 4.1 stars.
That's impressive.
Yeah. So, it's definitely got people talking. And I think it's something that, like, a lot of us can relate to. Have you ever felt that way? Like you're juggling all these different versions of yourself,
Totally.
the work the friend you present on social media. It's like
Right.
we're wearing all these different masks.
Yeah, and that feeling of fragmentation, it can really disconnect you from like who you are at your core.
Yeah. It's like, who are you under all those masks?
Right.
And then it's like having the courage to act in a way that reflects that true self, which can be super uncomfortable sometimes.
Exactly. And that's where this whole idea of a prototype comes in.
Okay. A prototype.
Yeah, think of it as like a blueprint
Okay.
or like a model
Hmm.
for authentic living.
Okay. So where does Jesus fit into all of this?
Well, Martin uses the life of Jesus as an example of someone who lived with incredible authenticity.
Okay.
Like Jesus consistently spoke truth to power, showed compassion to those who were marginalized, and lived a life that was totally aligned with his teachings.
So even if someone isn't religious, they could still like find inspiration in the way Jesus lived.
Absolutely. The book isn't about converting anyone to a specific religion. It's more about highlighting these principles of authentic living
Mm.
that anyone can apply to their life, regardless of their beliefs.
I remember reading about how Jesus challenged the authorities of his time, like calling out hypocrisy even when it put him at risk.
Yeah, that's a great example. And it takes a lot of courage to live that way, to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's unpopular or could have negative consequences.
Yeah, that level of authenticity, it doesn't seem easy to achieve. It makes me think about like all the choices we make in life. Careers, relationships, even just like small everyday decisions. Do you think those could be impacted by how fragmented we feel?
That's a great question. And it's exactly what Martin dives into next. He suggests that when we don't have that clear sense of self, it can lead to inconsistent choices. And then that leaves us feeling unfulfilled. Have you ever made a decision that seemed logical at the time, but deep down, it just didn't feel right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like that time I agreed to join a committee at work. I knew I wouldn't enjoy it, but it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. But it just ended up adding a ton of stress to my life.
That's a perfect example. Martin argues that when our actions aren't aligned with our true selves, we end up feeling a sense of disconnect and dissatisfaction. He suggests that we need to regularly reflect on our values and passions to gain a clear understanding of who we really are. This could look like journaling or meditation, or even just taking some time to really think about what matters most to you.
So it's about taking a step back from all the busyness and like tuning into ourselves. That sounds like a much needed practice in today's world.
It is. And what's interesting is that this self-reflection, it's not meant to be a solitary activity. Martin believes that community plays a huge role in shaping our identity
Ah.
and helping us express our authentic selves.
So it's not just about looking inward, but also like looking outward to the people around us.
Exactly. Supporting communities provide a sense of belonging and validation, and that helps us overcome self-doubt and embrace our true potential.
I remember reading a story in the book about a woman who found her true calling through a community outreach program. She was initially filled with self-doubt, but the support of her community helped her navigate those feelings, and she ended up discovering this passion for helping others.
That's a great story. It really highlights the power of community. The right support network can give you that crucial encouragement to step outside your comfort zone and pursue your passions.
It makes me wonder, how do we go about building communities like that in our own lives? Communities that really encourage authenticity, both for ourselves and for others.
That's a big question, and it's one that Martin explores in the next chapter, where he delves into some of the biggest barriers to living authentically. So we were just talking about supportive communities and how they can really help us embrace our authentic selves.
Right.
But as you can imagine, it's not always easy to live authentically.
Oh, for sure. Like, there are definitely obstacles that can get in the way in the real world.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that Martin highlights in the book?
Well, one of the biggest barriers is fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, the fear of not being good enough.
Yeah.
It's incredibly common, and it can hold us back from really expressing who we are.
Fear is something I can definitely relate to. It's easy to get caught up in worrying about what other people think, especially with social media. Like, it's always showing these seemingly perfect versions of everyone else's lives.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And, Martin's point is that overcoming fear It's not about like magically becoming fearless overnight. It's a process of gradually exposing ourselves to situations that require us to be authentic
Yeah.
and building resilience over time.
So like taking small steps outside our comfort zones, rather than trying to make a huge leap all at once.
Exactly. Think of it like a muscle you're building. Every time you do something that feels a little scary,
Yeah,
but aligns with your true self, you're strengthening that authenticity muscle.
I like that. Makes it feel more approachable. So besides fear, what other barriers does Martin talk about?
Another big one is the pressure to conform to societal expectations. It's like there's this invisible rule book
Mm,
for how we're supposed to look, act, and achieve.
right. Yeah, I definitely feel that pressure sometimes, like I should be doing certain things or fitting into a certain mold.
And the problem with conforming to those external expectations is that it can lead us down a path that doesn't really resonate with our hearts. We end up chasing someone else's version of success instead of defining what success means for ourselves.
Yeah, that sounds exhausting, always trying to be what someone else wants you to be. So how do we break free from those external pressures?
Martin emphasizes the importance of awareness. Like, start paying attention to those moments. When you feel that pressure to conform, ask yourself, am I doing this because I genuinely want to? Or because I feel like I should?
It reminds me of like that self-reflection we talked about earlier. The more we know ourselves,
Wow.
the better equipped we are to make choices that are actually aligned with our values.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that you're not alone in this. Building a supportive community, like we talked about earlier, can make a huge difference. Surrounding yourself with people who accept you for who you are can give you the strength to challenge those societal expectations.
Yeah, it's like having a cheering section as you navigate those decisions and stand up for what you believe in. But I imagine it can also be tough to reconcile authenticity with our existing relationships. What happens when being our true selves leads to conflict with the people we care about?
That's a valid concern. And Martin doesn't shy away from the fact that living authentically can sometimes lead to uncomfortable situations, even in our closest relationships.
So how do we navigate those situations?
Well, Martin suggests that true authenticity involves honesty, even when it's difficult. Sometimes being authentic means having challenging conversations, setting boundaries, or even letting go of relationships that no longer serve us.
That sounds really hard. It makes me think about that quote from the book. What if the church was meant to be a living community where people find belonging rather than just a building they attend? It seems like the same principle could apply to any relationship. It should be a place where we feel safe to be ourselves.
Absolutely. The ideal is to have relationships that are built on mutual respect, understanding, and acceptance. And sometimes, creating that kind of space requires us to have those tough conversations, to speak our truth, even when it's scary.
It sounds like a lot of courage is involved in living authentically, not just in our personal lives, but also in our careers. How does Martin address the idea of finding work that's truly fulfilling and aligned with our values?
That's something he explores in depth. He recognizes that we live in a world that often prioritizes status and financial gain over meaning and purpose. It can be easy to end up in a career that looks good on paper, but leaves us feeling empty and uninspired.
Yeah. It's like going through the motions without really connecting with the work you're doing. So how do we go about finding work that feels more aligned with our authentic selves?
Well, Martin suggests that it's not necessarily about finding the perfect job. It's more about finding ways to bring more authenticity into whatever work we're currently doing.
So even if you can't just like quit your job and follow your passion tomorrow, there are still steps you can take to make your work more meaningful.
Absolutely. Start by identifying your core values and then look for ways to express those values in your current role.
Okay.
Maybe it's volunteering for projects that align with your passions, or advocating for change within your organization, or finding ways to connect with your colleagues on a deeper level.
So it's about bringing your whole self to work, rather than just showing up and going through the motions. But what if you've tried all that, and you still feel like your current job is completely misaligned with who you are?
Then it might be time to start exploring other options,
Yeah.
even if it feels scary. Sometimes taking a leap of faith and pursuing a path that feels more authentic,
Mm.
even if it comes with risks or uncertainty, can be the most courageous and fulfilling thing you can do.
It's about having the courage to go after what you truly want, even if it means stepping outside of your comfort zone. So it seems like there's a common thread running through all of this, whether it's our relationships, our careers, or even just our everyday choices. It's about having the courage to be ourselves, even when it's difficult, and trusting that it will lead to a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
That's a great observation. And it leads us into the next part of the book, where Martin really dives into the practical side of integrating authenticity into our daily lives. And we'll explore that in more detail when we get back for the final part of this deep dive.
Okay, so we're back for the last part of our deep dive into Prototype by Jonathan Martin. We've covered a lot of ground so far, from the challenges of living authentically in a world that kind of pushes us towards being fragmented, to the inspiring example of Jesus, and some practical steps we can take to overcome those barriers and embrace who we really are. Now, I think it would be great to talk about some specific areas where this whole idea of authenticity can make a real difference.
Right. Like, how can we actually integrate this concept into different parts of our lives, like
Yeah.
our careers, our relationships, our spiritual practices, even our self-care routines?
Yeah, let's start with careers. I think a lot of people struggle to find work that they're really passionate about, work that feels meaningful to them and makes them feel like they're contributing to something bigger.
It's a common struggle. We often prioritize things like status or financial security, which are important, of course. But sometimes they come at the expense of pursuing work that's truly fulfilling.
Yeah, it's like you can end up in a job that looks good on paper, but it just leaves you feeling empty inside. So what does Martin suggest we do about that?
Well, he recognizes that, like, not everyone can just quit their job and follow their passion, at least not immediately. But he encourages us to think about our careers differently. It's not about finding the perfect job. It's more about bringing more authenticity into the work that we're already doing.
So even if you can't, like, make a drastic career change right now, there are still steps you can take to make your work more meaningful.
Absolutely. Start by identifying your core values, like what really matters to you. What are you passionate about? What kind of impact do you want to make? Once you have a good understanding of those values, you can look for ways to express them in your current role.
So maybe that means, like, taking on projects that you're excited about, or finding ways to use your unique skills, or maybe collaborating with colleagues who share your values.
Exactly. It's about bringing your whole self to work, not just going through the motions.
Right, but what if you've tried to bring more authenticity into your work and it's just not working? What if the job itself is just totally misaligned with who you are?
Then it might be time to start thinking about other options, even if it feels scary. Sometimes taking a leap of faith and pursuing a career that feels more authentic, even if it comes with uncertainty or risks, can be the most liberating thing you can do.
It's about trusting your gut and having the courage to go after what you really want, even if it means stepping outside your comfort zone.
Right.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about relationships. How does this idea of authenticity play out in our relationships with the people we care about?
That's a good question. I think authenticity in relationships, it's really about showing up as our true selves and allowing the people we love to do the same.
So creating a space where we can all just be ourselves without judgment.
Exactly. Letting go of the need to be perfect, being vulnerable, sharing our true thoughts and feelings, even the messy parts.
But what about those times when being authentic means having those difficult conversations
Yeah.
or setting boundaries? Like those can be tough, especially with people we're close to.
Oh, they definitely can be challenging, but they're also really important for healthy, authentic relationships if we're always suppressing our needs or avoiding those tough conversations just to avoid conflict. It can build up resentment over time.
Yeah, it's like you're building the relationship on a shaky foundation.
Right. Authenticity requires honesty, even when it's hard. It means speaking our truth, even when we're afraid of how the other person will react. And it also means being willing to listen and trying to understand their perspective, even if we don't agree.
So it's about creating that space for open and honest communication
Yeah.
where everyone feels heard and respected. Okay, let's talk about spirituality. How does authenticity connect to our spiritual practices or beliefs?
For a lot of people, spirituality can feel like a space where they're supposed to have it all figured out, where they should be like perfectly devout or enlightened. But that can be a lot of pressure. And if we're not being honest with ourselves about where we are on our journey, it can actually get in the way of our spiritual growth.
Yeah, it's like trying to project this image of spiritual perfection, even if you're struggling with doubts or uncertainties on the inside. So how can we be more authentic in our spiritual lives?
Martin suggests that real spirituality is about honesty, being honest with ourselves about where we are, even if it's messy or unconventional, embracing our questions, our doubts, our struggles, and our moments of clarity and connection, and finding practices that truly nourish our souls, rather than just going through the motions.
So it's not about forcing ourselves to fit into a mold. It's about finding what resonates with us personally.
Exactly. Maybe it's spending time in nature, or meditating, or journaling, or having deep conversations with people you trust. It's about finding what works for you. and letting go of the need to conform to someone else's expectations.
It's about honoring your own unique path. Okay, and lastly, let's touch on self-care. How does authenticity relate to how we take care of ourselves?
Self-care is such a big topic these days, but it's easy to get caught up in what we think we should be doing instead of what really nourishes us.
Right, it's not just about following the latest trends, it's about figuring out what actually feels good for you.
Authentic self-care is about listening to your body and your mind and giving yourself what you need to thrive. Maybe that's taking a long bath, or going for a hike, or
Oh.
spending time with loved ones, or just giving yourself permission to rest. It's about honoring your needs and prioritizing your well-being.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Prototype, what are some of the biggest takeaways that you hope listeners will remember?
For me, the biggest takeaway is that authenticity isn't a destination. It's a journey. It's a process of continuous self-discovery, growth, and change. And it's important to remember that we're not alone in this. There are people who will support us, and there are resources that can help us navigate the challenges.
It's about having the courage to be ourselves, even when it's scary, and trusting that the more authentic we are, the more fulfilling our lives will become.
Well said. So if you're feeling inspired to start living more authentically, take that first step, even if it's a small one,
Yeah.
and trust that it's worth it.
And remember that quote from Jonathan Martin. The good news is that you're already loved and accepted. The question is, will you live like it's true? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Prototype. We hope it's given you some things to think about and encouraged you to embrace your true self.